Maybe it seems like a deep dark night, but follow me outside into the moonlight. Welcome to Moonlight. This is a Wild Rose Moon production. I'm your host, John Baylor, and before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to those who make this show possible: Gibson Insurance and the Gibson Foundation, the Marshall County Community Foundation, and Marshall County Tourism. And I want to say a big thank you to Pam Gunterman for dropping in, spending some time with us, and sharing some poems. This is our second episode with Pam, and in the first one, we introduced a poetry collection of hers called Seasons of the Heart, and we'll be looking at a couple of other poems from that same collection today. But we also mentioned, you mentioned just in passing that a couple of these poems were included in the production Layers that took place at here at Wild Rose Moon. And before we get started, I was wondering if you could explain just a little bit of what Layers was about, because there's a little bit of music, a little bit of theater and dance, and a little bit of poetry, so I guess that sounds like it was right up your alley. But tell us what Layers was all about and how your poetry fit into it.
Layers was a great opportunity for me. It was the culmination of the involvement of 5 very talented women that all brought different things to the table. So it had music that was original, poetry that I wrote, but also poetry that one of the other performers, Maya, composed. And it was all choreographed by Marcia Heinsberger. Each of us brought something to the table that was totally different. We all had a different perspective, but somehow it worked together. My poems kind of set the tone because we used the different seasons to blend the music that was created and the dance that was choreographed, and we communicated those seasons through those elements. Michelle played the piano with her original pieces. Cindy played the harp. And then there was the beautiful dance that Maya and Marcia provided for us. And it gave people just an experience through the seasons. It was all set against these beautiful backdrops that were art of another form that Marcia developed. So there was art in the traditional sense, and there was art in music, art in poetry, art in dance.
And you had 2 of the poems that we'll take a look at. Seasons of the Heart we looked at in our last episode, and we'll be looking at Fresh Air coming up shortly here. Were there other poems? Were those the only 2 poems of yours that were featured in it?
No, there were 3 others. Fresh Air happens to be the poem for spring. There is a poem called Snowflake, which is winter, Autumn, which is autumn, and then there is the poem for the summer. So we used just the poems that were the title ones for each of the chapters.
Right. We'll go ahead, I think, and jump into this poem, Fresh Air. Although this was your spring poem, it touches on a few of them in a short span here. Let's see. Well, I guess that's, without further ado, we'll just jump into Fresh Air.
Fresh air. Breathe deep, and your step lightens, and at last you shed that sluggish cloak of winter. Spring has arrived with daffodils and the Easter bunny. Earth is reborn, and we are energized by the first breath of spring. Reawakened, we are inspired by its beauty to begin again.
We talked about the seasons, obviously, as the guiding principle, guiding motif of your work here. There's a lot of nature imagery throughout your poetry. Where does this, and you did mention a line from Frank Sinatra that was important for thinking of life in terms of seasons. But what are the other sources that make, for you in your life, that make seasons and nature important and part of the makeup of who you are?
There is nothing that can transport you to another place or another time than a smell. And all the seasons have a smell. Spring, when that first breath you breathe of that fresh spring air, it can transport you to all the other springs that you've lived. There is a frost in the air in winter that you can feel and smell. And there is absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, nothing more beautiful than the smell of burning leaves in the autumn. Summer has smells that are different. They're sometimes not just natural smells. It's the smell of people barbecuing, cooking in their backyard, and that transport you to your grandmother's backyard or your parents' backyard. The smells of the seasons take you any place you want to go and any place you've ever been.
I want to touch on a line in here and question. This poem opens with, "Breathe deep and your step lightens, and at last you shed the sluggish cloak of winter." When you wrote this, was there a particular sluggish cloak you have in mind, or are there different things in your life that you identify as a sluggish cloak of winter that you were able to shed?
I think in this regard, I was thinking of a literal cloak. We are weighed down by all the things we have to wear to make us warm in winter. And as spring comes, we shed those levels of cover and are exposed. And that's what gives us the chance to grow. We're able to explore because we're not weighed down by all that the earth kind of gives us to carry around. So there's the literal and the figurative cloak that we wear.
As for the figurative, we're a little weighed down. That's why we're 15 feet apart. I don't know how we got our 6 and then some, and we feel like we've got this this burden or this weight or this problem, something that needs to change somehow or another. And so, in a way, this is a poem that I would say speaks to this time. It speaks to any time you have trouble, which is all the time. But we're sort of a people hungry for some fresh air, I would say.
For sure. I think that a lot of people have felt during this time of quarantine that they have been imprisoned, so to speak. But everything that we go through in our lives has an upside. We either learn something more significant about ourselves, or we learn something we didn't want to know and learn we want to change it. And I think that this period of time that we're in right now has done that for many of us. But we can see an upside to everything. I mean, a lot of people have been very saddened that they can't congregate either as a church community or as a family. But it makes us realize how much those things mean to us and how much we will appreciate them more when we can return. So there's an upside to everything that we encounter.
You say when we return, and I'm just going to go ahead and use that as our little segue because we wanted to look at another poem here in this episode, and the title of this one is Return, which I really like as a title. I have a song that's called Return. This is not going to be related, but I'm going to go ahead and say this anyways. And I don't say this in the song, but the reason I use that as a title is because of a Chinese poem that I read in a world literature class that I took. in college. But in Chinese, your symbol for return is this V shape, which is the shape of geese flying. And so when you look up in the sky, then you see this message to you that says return. And so that's been used probably in a lot of Chinese poetry because that's a potent thing. There it is flying across the sky. Up, heaven is telling you return to whatever it is. Like I say, that didn't enter into my song, but it made the word a very compelling one for me. So I'll just hand it over to you then and see what you've done with return.
Return. Much like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. When the storm ended, I didn't know where I was. Off on my trip to the Emerald City, I admit that the road has not been pretty. When the wizard I did finally see, this is what he said to me. Click your heels and close your eyes, and you will get a big surprise. When I opened my eyes, what did I see but my own face in the mirror looking back at me? The lesson the wizard taught that would finally set me free is that to find your way home, I had to begin with me.
And I guess I'll just set you up with a simple question that maybe opens it all up is why do we have to look in the mirror and see ourselves?
We're really not much good to anyone else if we can't face ourselves. If we're running from something, running to something, we probably should stop and look inside. We can control a lot of who we are, where we go. We enter the outside world, and that does affect how fast we get where we want to go. But we control the path we take. We make decisions every day. My dad used to say, make a decision. And I would sometimes just shake my head or raise my shoulders. But he said, no decision is a decision. Not to do anything is a decision. And that's all up to me.
Why, this will, I think, be a kind of an extension of some of that, but why is this called Return?
This poem was inspired by a job change that I had, probably, 30 years ago now. And I had been offered something very attractive, or it seemed very attractive. And so I spoke about it with my husband, and he decided that I should take this chance. Sometimes the grass is not greener, and it was not. And the job I left pursued me and said, come back. And that return inspired this poem, and that job is where I've worked for the last 30 years.
But it sounds like more than a job, as it comes across here, that it's also there's a part of yourself maybe that you're walking away from to try a different job.
At that time, yes. When I read it now, knowing what inspired it, knowing where I am, I have a fantastic job that I get to do all kinds of things, and I get to be creative, and I get to be so many things I never thought I could be.
And what is that?
I manage a law office, but I also do marketing. I also plan their events. I get to write their posts for Facebook. I get to interact with their clients. I mean, it's a pretty great way to be creative in something that other people may not ever see would have that opportunity.
Right. Any closing remarks? I think we'll wrap it up soon. But if there was anywhere else you wanted to go here with Return, and we haven't mentioned The Wizard of Oz, which is your framework for it.
I love The Wizard of Oz. I've always liked that story. I've always liked the idea that Dorothy really had everything she ever wanted at home. And the characters are just so endearing, and they have endured. And I always think about the line, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, because so much of life is like that. You never know what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, thank you again, Pam, for sharing. Really enjoyed this, and thank you to Gibson Insurance and the Gibson Foundation. Thank you to the Marshall County Community Foundation and Marshall County Tourism for making this program possible. Thank you very much to the man behind the curtain, Mr. Ryan Meir, for everything you do with our camera work, our sound, and all of that. Thank you to Katie Smith also for the research that you've done with this, for helping to make this all run smoothly as well. Maybe it seems like a deep, dark night, but follow me outside into the moonlight.